wesleygospel.com. Welcome to wesleygospel.com. Let me get my shirt all straightened out there. What is it with these collars? They always get, you put a sweater on, you try to look decent, and then your undershirt comes up underneath it. Maybe that's why they wear collared shirts over these things. I don't know. Okay, so today, just based on some stuff that I dreamed, dreamed, got information from a dream. Um, Something I dreamed about, plus stuff that I saw on Facebook later on, almost along the same lines. Ooh, spooky. Um, Once again, the evolution subject. And I'm going to put this in the Bible economics category because this attacks people's jobs, engineering jobs. Maybe not so much, but definitely biology type jobs. And people don't like that. They don't like their jobs and their paychecks and their careers coming under scrutiny, right? But there's more to it than that. It's not just jobs with people with scientific careers teaching biology. It's also people who have an axe to grind, an anti-Christian axe to grind against Christianity, and they just love these three little idols. In fact, I would say that there's two idols, and I would call this Janus, the two-faced god of unbelief. On the one face, you have higher criticism. On the other face, you have Darwinism. If we didn't have these two things, then we wouldn't have the society of Forbes magazine society in which virtually every successful businessman is an agnostic and is known only for, with the exception of Bill Gates recently, is known only for the fact that he makes money, only for that. And so we have a completely, as I've said before, a completely agnostic country and a completely agnostic business culture with separation of church and state and separation of church and business, resulting from higher criticism and Darwinism. What is higher criticism? Higher criticism is where we get this, the Bible is full of contradictions and is filled with fairy tales concept. And that is a concept, it is a view, it is an ideology, and we could even come to the point of calling it a conviction for very many people in America, that the Bible is filled with contradictions and fairy tales and therefore is not to be trusted. The majority of people in the United States believe in higher criticism. The majority of them do. Why? Well, our greatest ecclesiastical institutions and our greatest higher education institutions teach these things. They teach higher criticism and Darwinism. Our public school system teaches Darwinism. Our state universities teach higher criticism in the philosophy departments and the religious studies departments. So our public school systems teach Bible is full of contradictions and fairy tales, and Darwinism is true. That is, our public high schools and our public state universities teach these things. Therefore, the majority of people that pass through these educational systems are going to assume that what they've been taught is factually true. They don't sit there and analyze and question what their teacher says. They just get the good grade and move on with their life. They focus on what really matters in life, like making money. So we have an educational system that's agnostic in this country, and it likes the fact that it's agnostic. The powers that be are agnostic. The educational powers that be. This is where this is coming from. Public educators. That's where it's coming from. but it's also coming from mainline Protestant seminaries and churches, the Seven Sisters of Protestantism, Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, Presbyterian Church USA, Episcopal Church, etc., American Baptist churches, and Disciples of Christ. These people teach the same thing about the Bible and Darwinism that the public school systems teach. So the end result is 70% of Americans believe in higher criticism or Darwinism, or to some extent. They might not know those phrases off the top of their head, but that's what they believe. Some fundamentalist comes up and starts talking about hell, repentance, the blood of Jesus, spirit world, angels, and demons. Sooner or later, somebody's going to do some laughing emoji on Facebook and talk about how the Bible is full of fairy tales and contradictions, and how God did not create the world in 6 days, but rather that the world naturally evolved over 4.6 billion years. This is just what they're taught. They're just coughing up what their high school biology teachers, what their college biology professors, and what their mainline Protestant pastors have told them. This is where this stuff is coming from. And there is very little to no interest due to a widespread lack of analytical thought. There is very little to no interest in questioning any of these things in this country because there is a widespread lack of analytical thought among the population. People just do not care about these things. It's too nerdy to care. It's too nerdy to care. Movies run the day, so all analytical thought shuts down after people graduate. And they walk around with these higher criticism, fairy tale, also called demythologization, fairy tales in the Bible, and naturalistic Darwinism notions that's somewhere deep in their subconscious, somewhere tucked away in the back of their brain. Meanwhile, they occupy them, they're the forefront of their brain with business success and careerism. This is why everything is so screwed up in this country. Slam down the Bible, slam down the first 3 chapters of the Bible, and replace it with naturalistic imaginations about how animals changed so frequently to the point of dog breeding being expressed to the point of animals and chimps turning into people. Through analogy and through visualization and through scientists and journals who just say so and usually like, oh, okay then. I'll just throw away all divinity then. That's fine. The people who really seem to care are really, really, virulent anti-Christian atheists and agnostics. And then when some believer pops up and starts saying something, they come under attack. Character assassination and such, superstitious folklore and fairy tale, etc., rhetoric. And yet, all of these are is just blunt denials of the paranormal. There's oftentimes literally no analytical arguments going on here in favor of it. How could you believe in such superstitious nonsense? Any rational, smart, intelligent person would never believe in paranormal fairy tales. They have a lot of words that they like to use. They like to use the word superstitious. They like to use the word fairy tale. They like to use the word myth. And they use these words nonsense. And it's so heady, It's hard not to get heady when you're talking about these things, mainly because these ideas come down from professors, and so the talk oftentimes, and the words oftentimes to convey these ideas are usually very professorial. So it's kind of hard to avoid the whole intellectual pride thing when even trying to converse about this stuff intelligently, because it's coming from the top down. It's coming from Rudolf Bultmann, demythologization of the Bible. It's coming from higher critics from 1800s German universities. It's coming from Charles Darwin, the great intellectual man, who was not a biologist, by the way. He was just a master's divinity dropout who had an axe to grind against God and came to be exalted as this great science thinker. My favorites are in response to all these things. In response to higher criticism would be Norman Geisler's When Critics Ask, a 700-something page book response to all the so-called Bible contradictions. Excellent book with a huge bibliography in the back. Demythologization, my biggest response to that would have to be Catholic mystical theology. I mean, after you've responded to the whole Bible is full of contradictions concept, now you have to respond to people who slam down the paranormal just because they say so concept. The only way to respond to that is to move out of the philosophical and into the experiential, into the experience of the paranormal. And it seems that the strongest writers in that area the Christian Church are medieval Catholic saints. The lives of the Catholic saints, reading their lives, hagiographies, life of St. Francis, etc. John Wesley had a little bit of that, but so much of what John Wesley had to say was theological and philosophical. But his journals, if you really, really dig through them, have plenty of paranormal entries in them as well. So my response to demythologization types, the Bible's full of, fairy tales. Jesus' miracles are just fairy tales. Concept. In other words, these are just blatant, heady-sounding professorial denunciations of the paranormal because he says so. Oh, okay, since he's so smart, I'll just accept that and reject all miracles that Jesus did. What? Just because some guy is smart, denies the paranormal, I should deny the paranormal too? Hold your horses a little bit. There's a lot going on there. You could say primitive, superstitious nonsense. Sure, you can say that, but at the end of the day, no matter how smart your words are sounding, you're still just denying the paranormal. Where's your arguments? They don't have any. They don't have any. And you can see this with cessationism too. You look at B.B. Warfield, Counterfeit Miracles. I read the whole thing, analyzed the whole thing, and all I saw was just slamming downs of the paranormal. Where's the arguments? There's none. There's no biblical arguments in favor for that at all. It's just people who have a bias against the paranormal because they have lack of experience and lack of desire to understand it. They live in some professorial environment. All they ever do is think about intellectual thoughts. They don't spend time in prolonged amounts of Catholic understanding of prayer, which is basically what Catholic mystical theology is. And so the strongest response the Catholic Church has ever responded to this is Catholic mystical theology. Augustine Polaine, the graces of interior prayer, etc., etc., etc. They're not perfect, but I mean, it's the strongest charismatic writing that's ever happened in the history of the church. And it was written quite a long time ago, too. Over very long periods of time. Intellectual, faith-based theology of paranormal experiences of Christians. And then, of course, Darwinism. How do you respond to something so complex as Darwinism? My favorite response that I've ever been able to see is Icons of Evolution by Jonathan Wells. Because here you have a man who is thoroughly a scientist in every sense of the word, doesn't quote the Bible even one time his entire book. So he's not trying to, in that book, he doesn't have an axe to grind, a creationist axe to grind. He's just using science and reason to point towards the old intelligent design theory and show the scientific incongruities and problems with Darwinism that the college textbooks and the scientific community are too embarrassed to grapple with. these are heady issues, so heady that most people don't want to deal with them. It's dry, it's boring, don't want to deal with it. And yet you live agnostic lifestyles and don't teach your kid catechism when you're old enough to become a parent. That's not only an economic problem, that's a spiritual problem, that's a social problem. And so, of course, this applies to a biblical understanding of economics, because when families are formed and you have absolutely nothing to go on to produce family values, faith-based family values, you've got an economic problem. You say, what do you mean an economic problem? Well, you're either a biblical economist or an agnostic economist. Which one are you going to be? Because when you become a parent, one of those forms of economics is going to take hold in your life. It's either going to be God-based economics or agnostic-based economics. Sadly, most people are taking an agnostic approach to economics, raising their children with an agnostic understanding of economics. Agnostic-based education, agnostic-based careerism. And why are our families so dysfunctional? Got me. There is no fear of God before their eyes. That's the answer. And our teachers, our professors teach higher criticism, demythologization of the Gospels, and Darwinism. And everybody's just like, okay, that's the problem. There are books that need to be read. There is an incomplete education going on here. People are only seeing one side of the issues here, and problems result. God bless you out there. This is John with WesleyGospel.com.